Former President Bush has pushed back on criticism about the American aid to Ukraine. He said this: I think we're a big enough nation to do more than one thing. And continuing to fight against AIDS on the continent of Africa and supporting the Ukrainian freedom fighters is not going to constrain our capacity to help our own citizens. In a grown-up world, George Bush is right. In a grown-up world, the United States can lead globally and also locally. In a grown-up world, the United States can continue to implement PEPFAR in Africa, probably one of the greatest health aid programs ever to be conceived on planet Earth. It has dramatically reduced rates of HIV and AIDS across an entire continent, a continent larger than the North American continent. It's done a phenomenal job. And we should be able to help the people of Ukraine. We should be able to help the people of Ukraine. And we should also be able to help our own citizens. But that's the problem. And this gets to Pete Buttigieg, and this gets to Joy Behar. This gets to the problems we have in this country at a national level. We're getting the small things wrong. We're not doing the small things well. We've got problems in the country. And this administration, and to some degree even the prior administration, seemed to look elsewhere, to fix elsewhere, to deal with things at a small level to help those loyal to a side as opposed to helping all Americans. How many of the Democrats out there, if they were really honest, Joy Behar among them from The View, who essentially says the people of East Palestine deserve what they got because they voted for Donald Trump. How many of the Democrats inside the White House, Pete Buttigieg's staff at the Department of Transportation and others, look at this, it's East Palestine. I mean, it's not Beverly Hills. Screw them. They can help themselves. They're all about rugged individualism. How many, you and I know darn well that there have been people in this administration over the last 20 days who have said things very similar to Joy Behar. They have said things like, they just voted for J.D. Vance. Let him help them. They don't need our help. They're not going to vote for us. It's not a vote. So it's not worth bothering them. And this is the problem. Washington used to work for the people, even though it didn't work well. It still worked some. And it worked for people regardless of partisanship. It worked for people regardless of their votes. It worked for people regardless of constituency. And more these days, both sides playing for tribal sports decide that if I can't get a vote out of this, why am I going to bother? But not only that, beyond that, there's also a level of incompetence involved. We're not sending the best and brightest to Washington, D.C. We're not stocking the bureaucracy with the best and brightest. We're stocking them with people who couldn't get a job in the private sector. And so the result is that we have an American people who don't want to help the Ukrainians. They don't see it's in our national interest. And you've got the people who are isolationists or to some degree really are enamored with the Russians because Vladimir Putin bashes the woke, so therefore they're Team Putin. I mean, Vladimir Putin gave a speech the other day and essentially took on the corrupt, lazy, hedonistic West. And you've got people online like, yeah, he's right. Why are we battling Russia? He's right about the wokes. You know, he says these things to lure away simple-minded fools from the West. He's playing you, and you want to be played by him. But you look at the stuff we're doing in this country, and it really does seem like the country's lost its damn mind. You've got you got more people are invested in Drag Queen Story Hour than in East Palestine, Ohio. The country seems like it's gone off the rails. We can't educate our kids. Our schools don't function well. The post office doesn't function well. The TSA going through airports is a nightmare. The basic functions of government in this country aren't doing well, and that breeds resentment. And, you know, this is something I think the Biden administration should appreciate and understand. If you just stopped, if you put on hiatus for just a minute If you just pause the diversity, equity, inclusion BS for just a minute, if you stopped the advance of human rights of 0.1% of the country, that is, if you stopped advancing the transgender agenda over everything else in the country right now, if you stopped the culture war on gas stoves, if you stopped the intersectional nonsense on display everywhere, and you just focused on the core competencies of the government, stop advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and start advancing the mail on time. Stop advancing Drag Queen Story Hour and actually fix the potholes. Stop advancing promiscuity and hedonism and actually teach kids reading, writing, and arithmetic. Maybe people would be less in the camp of, well, we can't do anything here, so why are we helping Ukraine? I don't know that either party really understands this. I specifically don't think the Democrats understand it right now. The Democrats are always in revolutionary mode. They want to advance transgenderism. They want to normalize Drag Queen Story Hour. They want to normalize everything. They want to define deviancy down. What was normal and is now bad. What was bad is now normal. The Democrats want to normalize every bit of hedonistic lifestyle in America. They want to tell you you're a bigot if you don't go along with it. They're always advancing. They're always in revolutionary mode. They're always the culture warriors. While telling the right they're the culture warriors for just wanting to stand pat, stand put, and preserve the status quo. Somehow we're the culture warriors for not wanting to go along with the culture war. And what they don't do are the core competencies. We're not educating our kids. Cities that spend disproportionate amounts of money on public schooling are turning out kids who are illiterate. We got kids who can't do basic math. We're saddling them with student loan debt to get through college to get meaningless college degrees. Our infrastructure is crumbling. You know, it's allowed the conspiracy theorists of the world to speculate someone must be sabotaging the rail lines all over the country. There have been sabotage of the rail lines from wacky environmentalists over the last couple of years, but these numbers of derailments were happening. It's because our infrastructure screwed up. And by the way, you should also know, thanks to government regulation, it actually is a pain in the butt for the rail companies to take care of their own lines because of the hassles they have to go through. They can't do it expeditiously. They can't do it efficiently. The government drags things out and makes it difficult and costly to do things. It costs more, for example, in this country to deal with public transportation, to build a subway system, to drill underground, to make a subway line. It costs overwhelmingly more than it does in other parts of the world because of American bureaucracy, because we outsource so much to high-tech consultants, because we rely on the McKinsey consultants of the world to tell us what to do, and the McKinsey consultants of the world, by virtue of their name, claim to get it right, and often they get it wrong. And then you've got a situation like East Palestine, Ohio. Train derailed 20 days ago. And until the media attention got focused on it, the Secretary of Transportation was uninvolved with it. Until the spotlight was put on it and his absence from the spotlight was noted, he didn't need to be in the spotlight, didn't care to be in the spotlight, didn't care to pay attention to it. It was all about appearances. If this administration, if every administration were focused more on competence, not partisanship, not who benefits, not gaming it out to say, well, there are so many blue-collar Trump voters here, screw them, you would bolster your arguments everywhere else. There is a prevailing sentiment that if Joe Biden can't change people's minds on Ukraine over time, all the support for it is going to fade away. But he can't change people's minds and bolster the Ukrainian cause when at home he can't get the basics right. You know, George Bush, the tide turned on Bush after Katrina. People were willing to allow him aggressiveness abroad, allow him the surge. But when Katrina came through and there was such a disaster and he had Michael Brown at FEMA and he told Brownie he was doing a good job and he really wasn't, it suddenly made people realize, how can we spend all of our time abroad and we can't get the basics right at home? We've had cities in this country destroyed by a massive hurricane, and we're focusing on Iraq. Why? That seems bad. And the sentiment turned rapidly. The Democrats took advantage of Bush flying over New Orleans, looking out the window. They said he was cold. He was cruel for just looking out the window, not actually being on the ground. Now, it's very much like Pete Buttigieg. They're giving Buttigieg a pass for staying out of the way for 20 days. Bush did not want to land on the ground. He did not want to divert resources to him when they needed to clean up. And the left said it was cold, it was awful, it was mean for him just to fly over. And the media enabled a sentiment to fester that Bush was far more interested in Iraq and Afghanistan than home. That sentiment's never gone away. It stays administration to administration. That they're far more interested in picking winners and losers, which is true. They're far more interested than to award partisans on their side as opposed to just helping Americans every day. And when you look at what's going on in the country right now, you see this pattern recurring. That people in this country feel left behind. They feel ignored by Washington. They feel like Washington has made things worse. They're still reeling from lockdowns and COVID. They're still reeling from economic disaster from having been shut down and their businesses closed up by government fiat because of a virus. And now it turns out the wearing masks the whole time, more and more studies show, really didn't do a whole lot of good, in large part because people weren't wearing masks. They weren't wearing N95 masks. They weren't wearing them well. And by the way, they generally weren't working anyway. And yet you still got some states in this country that demand kids are still wearing masks in school. Yes, there are still enclaves in this country where they're still making kids go to school wearing masks because of COVID. Our government seems uninterested in helping Americans unless they can get a vote out of it. And that has bred contempt for Washington. Our government is failing our kids. They've given up on trying to educate our kids, and now they want to indoctrinate them into sexuality. And that has frustrated Americans. Our government is unable to take care of the poor and needy in this country, really doesn't seem like it wants to take care of the poor and needy in this country unless they can get a vote out of it. Meanwhile, they want to fund hundreds of millions of billions of dollars to Ukraine. I support funding Ukraine. I do. I support the war effort in Ukraine. I do. But I got to tell you, it makes it very difficult to defend the action when it seems like our government can't get the basics in this country right. It's not trash collection because that's a local government job, but it is delivery of the mail, which they continue to screw up. It is delivery of resources to local communities, which they continue to screw up. It is delivery of an education system that actually educates our kids, which they continue to screw up. Our government continues to screw up at home all of these things. If the government would just get the basics right, stop with the woke DEI crap and just get the basics of government right. Stop trying to revolutionize, expand diversity quotas in government, and just actually get the job of government done. Stop trying to hire people because of who they sleep with or their skin color, and hire competent people to get the job done and show people government can still work whether there's a vote there or not. And then maybe you might be able to turn the tide of people to say, yes, we can fix our country and we can take care of people like the Ukrainians. But unless you can show people that we actually can take care of Americans, you're not going to convince a lot of people that we should be spending our time helping Ukraine when we've got people in East Palestine, Ohio, waiting for Pete Buttigieg to show up, and he only showed up because Donald Trump beat him to it. It's going to be real hard to convince Americans to do more on the world stage when you can't show them you're doing the basics competently here at home.